Thank you. I want to begin by thanking especially Damon Abraham and Garrett Modell, friends from Colorado. As a practitioner of this phenomena, it can be a very lonely thing, a very lonely experience. So to recently have connected with two scientists, two very intelligent people who are interested in this, to discuss it with some intelligence is a special treat. And my being here, for me, shows the wonderful possibilities of practitioners and scientists like yourselves working together and what's possible from that, with that sense of open-mindedness and creativity. So it's a nice title, Cultural Emergence of Macro-Psychokinesis Advantages for Research. What I really wanted to put on this slide was macro-psychokinesis, or what I refer to as telekinesis, is spreading like wildfire across the globe right now, especially the way that I practice and teach it. And people in every country and every age group are learning this very quickly at different levels. And my hope is that there was a time when you'd have to wait for a talented subject to come and do experiments with you, but soon you'll have a very large pool of willing and able subjects, and you yourself can become a subject with this phenomena because it's very easy to train. So before I get into the slides, I want to describe how I got into psychokinesis, because for me this is very personal work. About 4 years ago, I'd say three things happened at the same time that brought me into this. The first was that I'd been teaching meditation for a while, and I was looking for a new teaching tool to help people understand the power of the mind and of intention, something that would illustrate that what you're doing as meditators is worthwhile. Meditation on its own, you might know, it can be quite boring sometimes. So I was looking for something to spice things up. Also, I'd, around the same time, taught myself how to have out-of-body experiences, and I knew that eventually I would want to teach that to people also. But the problem with that experience is, for someone who learns by seeing, because of the seemingly subjective nature of an OBE, out-of-body experience, I can't show someone what that's like. I can't take him into a room where there's a sleeping person and say, and that's an OBE. There's really nothing to see there. So I wanted to find a way that would illustrate that we are more than our physical bodies, that some part of us can extend beyond and influence our outer world. And the third reason was that I'd recently separated from a problematic spiritual teacher and spiritual organization, and I needed to find something for myself that was purely me, something I could say I didn't have to give away my personal power to anyone to learn this or get this ability. I wanted to find something that was intrinsic to the human being. So for me, it was a search for something self-empowering. So yeah, this is scientific on one level, but as we all know, there's always this connection between science and the deeper meaning of what it is to be alive and to be a human being. So I just want to show you now what I'm talking about. This starts off with a piece of paper, a piece of tinfoil, balanced on a needle underneath a glass container. And that's the level I started training myself at. So the reason I came to telekinesis, or PK, was I was looking for something to solve my problem, and I came across a video featuring Cheryl Lee Black giving a presentation to the International Association of Near-Death Studies, and she was talking about how through her near-death experiences she had attained this ability to move objects with her mind, and this was exactly the kind of experiment that she was able to do. So I thought, okay, this is a legitimate thing. Of course, every step of the way I had to doubt myself, wondering, is this real? And this shows the level of doubt. So at the top photo, you see that I'm holding the glass container in my hands, and I'm trying to send my intention into the object to get it to move. And of course, the first thought is, well, isn't that just convection, Sean? Aren't you just heating up the air in the glass? Well, it took me 70 days to get the object to move. Every day for at least an hour. For 2.5 months, I'd sit there with my hands on this thing, trying to get the thing to move. And I was experimenting with methods of meditation that I had learned, and principles of spirituality and new thoughts, such as where you place your attention is where the energy goes. And of course, we've heard of things like The Secret, the law of attraction, the power of intention. So this is very much in line with that line of thinking. 70 days is what it took before I had my first success. Now, after I had attained that success, I asked my wife if she wanted to try to do this. And I asked her because I knew that she had had many lucid dreams over the years where she would move objects around the room within the dream state. So she sat down in front of my target, and I asked her, would you like me to show you how to do this? And she said, no, I'll just do it. And she sat there and just started gracefully waving her hand in front of her, looking at the object, and it started to turn. So you can imagine my consternation and my jealousy. 2.5 months of nothing for me, and on her first try, she gets it. And but one thing that happened before my first success was in the week before, I would fall asleep at night, and in my mind's eye would appear this image of the tinfoil starting to turn. And that spontaneous image would occur. And I think what this illustrates is that something inside of me had to change before my outer world changed. So after I had my success, I started taking my hands away from the glass. So here, 2 or 3 inches, and the movement is exactly the same. Later on, I'll talk about my YouTube channel where it's filled with videos where you can see this in motion. Then I wanted to see, well, is it the human energy field and my hands being close to it? Is that a requirement? So I started moving further and further away, doing it with my hands in my lap, and I found that I could still get it to move. And over time, and this is over a period of months, I could stand up further away from the object and still have the same effect by using the technique that I was developing over time. Here we have a more complicated experiment with 3 objects in one container, and in this case it's a double experiment because I'm experimenting with gold, silver, and copper, wondering if the element in use makes a difference. Gosh, I'd love to have a piece of bismuth and magnesium, maybe from a UAP. I wonder what would happen then. I say that tongue-in-cheek, but actually there's a conversation about UAPs, about those vehicles having a strong relationship or conjunction with consciousness itself. And people who talk about having had the experience of flying those craft also share the idea that it's very much about consciousness and it's not about driving with a steering wheel. So here's another version of that experiment, 3 objects in 3 separate containers, trying to make them move at the same time. And then here's another interesting, here's my wife and I, together sitting at a distance, working together on the same target, getting it to move. This was early on, and you can see I still have a high level of doubt because I've taped the bottom of the glass container to be certain that there's no wind crawling underneath the glass to move the object. Then this is more recent. I'm on the 10th floor of my building, so I set up cameras and I wanted to see if I could do this remotely. So in the bottom picture is an image of me in my car in the garage. So I'm in the garage is to the right of the taller building, and I'm sitting there, I'm not getting any visual feedback of the object at home, and still by imagining it and setting my intention, I could get it to move. So this really represents a stretch, because in the beginning I thought maybe it's about my biofield emanating from my hands or one of my body centers, but here I am at quite a distance. And I think if you're a remote viewer, this would be interesting to you because this does have that angle of remote viewing or remote influencing. So if you're a little bored with looking at images, you want to try and move something, I'd encourage you to start working on this. Here's a group situation, and after a period of time, I started teaching this in Denver, and I teach this every month now. And I found that within a 2-hour period, and it's actually speeding up, it takes less and less time now every time. Everyone in the class, right, say I have a 95% success rate. People can do what took me months and months to learn how to do now. Just they pick it up like that. Okay, so the reason it's so easy to teach now is because there's a very basic formula. It's like cooking a Toll House cookie. All you have to do is follow the instructions and put the right ingredients together. And there are 4 ingredients, and that is the passage of time, which means you can't push it, you can't rush it. Relaxation, both bodily and mental, and I include a special yogic breathing technique that I borrowed from the tradition that I'd been trained in. The use of intention, which is very, very subtle, far more subtle than I thought it would be, and the application of attention, basically developing a living relationship with the object. So if any of you have a spouse or a loved one, you might know that feeling of when you're really paying attention to the one you love and they can feel it and there's a connection there that's built, and over time that strengthens that relationship, versus when you barely look at each other in the face anymore and things dry up and there's no connection. And it sounds romantic, but there are anomalies that occur with this. For example, when I started really developing a strong relationship with my first piece of tinfoil after a few weeks of success, it got to the point, and I named it Tinny, I named it, where I would walk in the room where I had the setup with the intention of going over and sitting down and starting my training, but placing my first step through the doorway, looking at it across the room, it would turn and respond to me from across the room. So a very strange relationship there. But like any spouse or loved one, it could be cantankerous, and sometimes I would sit there for 20 minutes and it wouldn't move, and then I stand up and walk away, and that's when it starts turning like crazy. I think that has a lot to do with the blockage of the conscious, rational thinking mind, the ego, and it was when I got up to walk away, when I took the ego out of the situation, when the object started responding. Right now, as you're listening to me, if you're interested in this, you've already begun your PK training, because while you're hearing my words and seeing these pictures, if you're having any strong emotions or feeling a headache, or you think this is a load of hoo-ha, that could be your rational mind getting in the way and blocking the flow of your own natural energy and the strength of your intention. But everyone who does this has to work with their mind this way, because that's one of the beautiful things about this, is the research ability. Not only can you look at yourself externally, but you can watch yourself internally. When you do the breathing technique, when you relax your mind and body, you can feel it on a very subtle level. And it's not like looking at a machine and something happens very quickly, such as with an RNG. But here, when you feel yourself relax, when you feel your mind enter the state, and you see before you the piece of tinfoil starting to respond, it's graceful, it's tactile, it's sensual, so it's immediate feedback. And actually that brings me to a quote. I wanted to bring Ingo Swann into this, and I read his book, Everybody's Guide to Natural ESP, and where he's discussing some of the issues with research, he writes, "Missing in this grand archive is a category of reports detailing what is happening to a subject in his or her own head during the time the ESP experience is taking place. I strongly believe that the head experience of a subject, especially a successful subject, is of primary importance for anyone truly wanting to be in touch with the fundamental workings of the external sensing, or in this case, with the external motion." So there's so many books written about these phenomena, but what's really missing is, what does it feel like inside of the person who's doing it? What are they doing to their body and their mind? And this kind of work really gives you a way to experience it for yourself, that you feel different. And you can tell when your feelings change and the object stops moving at that instant. So you're learning very quickly through observation. So it's very powerful that way, versus working with subatomic particles. You can't really see what's going on unless you're watching the graph, and that is a good form of feedback, but there's something really provocative about seeing a macro level target. Okay, well, in this case, I bought a commercial grade EEG monitor to see if I could find something going on with my brain waves as I got the object to move from across the table. But I'm not trained to use an EEG machine, and there's always a question about the accuracy of these commercial grade products, but this is an example of what we could do with this. Here's some other things we could do. And of course, much of this is obvious and known to you already. Measuring blood pressure, heart rate, blood volume, galvanic response, pupillary response. You could do surveys. You could do a sheep versus goat questionnaire. And I do these, I don't do the survey, but teaching a class is like a natural survey, because I can sort of tell ahead of time who's going to be successful right away and who's going to have a hard time during one of my classes. So I teach about a dozen people at a time, and I'm sorry to say that it's usually the scientists who have the toughest time getting the object to move, because because they're so smart, but they're trying to figure out how this actually works while they're trying to apply the technique. And the thing is, there's just no room for that type of rational thought when you're trying to affect an object at a distance while you're learning. I think the more experience you have, the better you get at it, and then there starts to become more room for rational thinking at that point. On the quantum level, of course, RNGs, but if you do anything with measuring ambient energy in the room or in the container or near the person, that's interesting. Measuring biophoton emissions, that could be interesting as well. There are other interesting experiments that could be done. I haven't done this one myself, but I think there is research done showing that entheogens do increase psi ability in some cases. So if anyone has a mushroom around, and we could try and see what happens when you look at the object and try to make it move under the influence, I can tell you a few glasses of wine don't harm the effect at all. And I'm from Colorado, but I still haven't tried the other herb to see what that effect would be. It's just not my thing, but I'd encourage you to try if you're interested. So here are the benefits of this, and it seems like I'm in the low budget experiment portion of this morning. It's very cheap. It's objective in certain ways because you can see the object moving and you can feel what's going on inside of yourself when it's moving. And it's highly repeatable. I know that there is the issue of the decline effect and the lack of novelty when you're dealing with things like RNGs or other ways of practicing PK, but there's something really exciting about seeing the macro level movement of the object. It's thrilling. The decline effect still does happen. I do get tired after several hours of doing this. I do get bored sometimes, but it presses me to try new experiments over time. So, as a researcher, you don't have to go out looking for talented subjects. You can become your own subject and do your own research, but rest assured, people around the world, especially children, are learning this. I started my YouTube channel 2.5 years ago, and I already have 11,000 subscribers, and I've had over 800,000 views. And this is such a strange topic, but I think it makes a comment that to have those many subscribers and views in 2.5 years for such a topic, it's remarkable. And I can tell you from the YouTube data that it's 30% women and 70% men, but that might also say something about who's up late at night watching YouTube videos about paranormal phenomenon. In my classroom, it's really close to even between men and women, and it's people, you know, it's adults mostly. But kids write me every day. They say, thank you, I've learned how to do this, and I have videos out there for children to teach them how to do this. With a recent update last week, and this is with a little bit of communication with Dean Radin, he suggested using a vacuum system, and I did purchase one. And I found out that I might not actually be doing macro PK, but it might be micro PK, because in a vacuum system, I cannot make it move. I could get it to wiggle, but it could be because it's not a true vacuum. So the question is, what's really happening here? Until then, I thought, oh, I'm directly affecting the piece of tin foil or paper. But in this case, it seems that even though that's what the instructions say to do, pay attention to the target, there could instead be a transfer of energy from the air molecules to the object. Or if we consider Brownian motion, and I'm not that smart, that comes from Dean Radin, maybe there is something about the organization of the movement of the air particles. There's a lot of energy there, but because it's random, you don't feel it. But if you could get all the molecules to move in the same direction at the same time, it can produce a very powerful effect. That's just one idea, but maybe there are other things happening too, other ways that energy is being transferred. So that's my update. This might not be macro, but regardless, it's a fantastic way to learn, and I wrote a couple books to teach you exactly how to do this and how it feels on the inside, and I have a video course. And so become your own subject, and you can combine it with other experiments as well. And if you're into physical mediumship, I think there are connections to be made here. There's connections to be made with atmospheric turbulence, such as in Danny Caputi's presentation, connections with remote viewing and remote influencing. So this is a key. that opens a lot of doors. And for me, it hasn't brought very many answers, but it's led to many beautiful, beautiful questions. So thank you very much. Is there time for questions? Or okay, thank you.
Hi, thanks for the great talk. I wonder if you feel that relaxation in itself is necessary, or whether it's just a means in order to get the mind out of the way. I'm asking particularly because there seem to be very agitated states of mind that produce macro-PK effects, as in anger or RSPK, poltergeist, and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a wonderful question. Now, because this is sort of a control type of PK where it's highly repeatable and everything, the relaxation I think is necessary for that. But there are PK practitioners who do use force, they do use high emotion, they do a lot of straining, and they get strong responses, sometimes randomly, sometimes non-randomly. I steer away from that because Nina Kulagina, the Russian from the 1960s, I understood that she would be in a lot of pain after a day of this, and she would lose weight, and she had a heart attack. And there's a young man in Turkey named Fadi Mir. He could do extraordinary things, but it involved a lot of straining. And I found out a few months ago that he died of a simultaneous brain hemorrhage and a heart attack. So I encourage you to go the subtle way, the meditative way.
Two-part question from the international crowd that are watching on live stream. One is you showed the three spinners in a jar, and in that point or at any other point when you've done it, are you able to independently get an individual one to move, is the first part. And the second part is, what have you done with this kind of more macro practically, now that you know you can do it? Are you doing it out in your life in some way?
I have done one experiment with 2 targets in one glass container at different altitudes just because they didn't fit sideways. And it took a lot of work actually to get them to move independently of each other. And it's due to something I call the stickiness effect. There are a lot of anomalies that occur with this. Stickiness, here's an example where I have 2 containers with targets in them, and I spend 20 minutes moving the one on the left, and then I turn my attention to the one on the right, and I start just applying the technique to that one. And this one doesn't move, but the original one continues responding to my effort. So it took a lot of effort to do independent movement on purpose. And then I forget your second. Oh, practical. Well, my passion is just teaching everything I know. So I think I haven't gone as far as I can go with this because I keep it slow and basic because I want to just share it. I teach what I can, and I think if I didn't spend time teaching, maybe I could be doing much cooler stuff that it might not make me as happy.
It sounds like you've been fairly successful teaching people in person with this technique. And if I understood correctly, you've also got a YouTube channel and books that teach what you've learned about this. Do you have any sense for how successful students are learning this technique from your publications without direct contact or supervision from you?
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I don't have enough data to have a great answer. I did include a survey at the end of my first book where they could go to a website and give me their experience. After nearly 2 years of the book being out, only 1 or 2 people have filled out the survey, but I think that's, maybe people are private about it. I think they are not as successful as quickly doing it on their own. There is maybe a field effect or a confidence effect about doing it in a room with other people with me present. There's also the basic thing of following all the instructions very carefully. There are other things that occur, like this effect is so subtle, it does not win over static. If you develop a coat of dust over your container and there's a static field, it'll hold it in place the way a compass needle always faces north. People usually accuse me of using static to create the movement, but static confounds the effect. So people need to make sure they keep their equipment clean and static free, make sure that the tinfoil has not actually started settling on the needle so there's excess friction, things like that. So I think it's better to learn with me directly, but if you work at it, you'll still, within a few days, you should have a result at home. And you can always reach me and I'll give you some tips and encourage you if you're trying this on your own.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I wonder if you're aware that humans, in spite of the PK effect, which is mysterious, also emit a variety of energies, infrared up to the microwaves in some cases. But we also have a strong static electric field. And I'm wondering if you've considered that you may be training yourself to alter your own electric field. And I've been doing research with these ghost detectors, which are actually a pretty decent, I don't know if I can get it to work here, but it's a pretty decent electric field detector. And I have been able to see that I can set these things off at 1 foot away when I'm not feeling too well, but as much as 30 feet away when I feel very energetic. So you might consider measuring your own electric field as you move about, your PK experiment.
Thank you. That is a wonderful suggestion. That's a great way to research it. One note I wanted to make that I forgot that relates to what you just said a little bit is that in the technique, there's a cycle of breathing that involves breathing in, inhaling a certain way, holding the breath for a few moments and holding your mind a certain way, and then exhaling and holding the breath out for a period. And there are times when you're doing this when you are very closely synced up with the object so that it'll be turning, let's say, clockwise as you inhale. Then when you hold your breath and pause your mind, the object pauses motion. And as you exhale slowly, feeling your torso in a particular way, it reverses direction. So there's that synchronicity. So to line that up with your suggested research, how does my own field shift during the inhale and the exhale? I think anyone interested in yin-yang theory might have something to say about this too, with the in-breath and the out-breath. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.